Welcome everyone to the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. Today we'll be talking about how to inspire, engage, and cultivate excellent employees for mentoring programs. I'm Audrey Cruz, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. Mentoring programs work really hard to tackle big issues with limited resources. Without the funds to offer higher salaries and robust benefits packages, though, organizations often struggle to develop and retain excellent employees. This limits the program's full potential and stakeholder impact. This webinar will explore strategies and specific tactics to inspire, engage, and cultivate excellent employees for your mentoring program, even in traditionally high turnover positions. So let's get started. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resource Center, and facilitated in partnership with Mentor. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships shown on this slide. In addition to this webinar series, the NMRC provides resources for mentoring practitioners. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide more details about how you can access this free support. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. And to continually improve the series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. Please take just 3 minutes to give us your feedback. We want this to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. Minnie will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar, which will come toward the end. We may not get to all of your questions because there are several hundred of you on this webinar, but we will do our best. The questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. So first, to get a sense of who's with us today, we have 2 short polls. The first one is going to be, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? Are you a beginner, experienced, or an expert? Excellent. We've got a great breakdown today. 25% beginners, welcome. We hope this will be helpful. Experienced, we have 68% and 6% experts. This is going to be an excellent webinar that will hopefully apply to all of you. Our second poll is, what is your role in the mentoring field? Are you a practitioner, a researcher, a technical assistance provider, a funder, or somebody else? Excellent. We have lots of practitioners on the line, 66%. We also have 7% technical assistance providers, some funders, and 26% other. So thank you all so much for joining us. We've tailored this webinar in a way that we hope each of you will get some really great tips and practices that you can take back to your organizations. So let's talk about our objectives for today's webinar. We have 3 primary objectives. The first is to learn 3 strategies for engaging employees. Those strategies are developing mutual purpose, sharing power, and supporting growth. These are all evidence-based strategies that we'll talk a bit more about in the upcoming slides, and you'll hear lots of information from our panelists about how to make this real. Which takes us to our second objective, which is to explore specific approaches, activities, and tactics that are used to implement these engagement strategies in real-life mentoring programs. You'll hear from 2 excellent panelists, which will provide you with lots of information about how they do this in their own programs and how you can translate this to your programs. Finally, at the end of the webinar, we're going to provide an activity that will allow you to identify 2 engagement tactics that you can implement immediately in your programs. So let's meet the people who will be a part of this webinar. As I said, I'm Audrey Cruz, and I'll be your facilitator. I partner with diverse organizations across private, public, and nonprofit sectors to develop strategic and tactical solutions that better serve stakeholders. I'm currently a senior change architect with Team Tipton, where I help government agencies to develop exceptional teams and address their most pressing problems. I led statewide quality mentoring initiatives for agencies in the state of Colorado and worked for 12 years with volunteers, youth, and families in Washington, D.C. I've also served on numerous mentoring committees locally and nationally, and have been a formal mentor for 8 years. I'm so excited to introduce our first panelist, Ericka Porter. Ericka Porter is a Denver native and graduate from Southeastern University in youth ministries. She's worked with and for urban and underserved students for the last 20 years in various capacities, including work in public school districts, faith and community-based organizations, and churches across the country. Her move back to Denver afforded her a role with Denver Public Schools Office of Career and College Success as program manager for the Coach Mentoring Program, designed for high school students to explore career and college options through mentoring from professionals in high-demand industries. Ericka also leads equity and inclusion efforts across the department to ensure all students have access to high-quality programming and education. Just for kicks, Ericka is the oldest of 5 sisters, an avid Denver Broncos fan, and up for sushi or pho at a moment's notice. Welcome, Ericka. Would you mind telling us a bit more about your mentoring program?
Sure. Thank you, Audrey. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be with you today. So the DPS Coach Mentoring Program is really unique in that it lives inside of the school district. So we are the career and technical education arm of Denver Public Schools, and our program is solely focused on career mentoring. So we match students with industry professionals over an academic school year to explore careers, learn professional traits, and discover their post-high school plans, and hope that they walk away being able to make more informed decisions about their future. Some highlights about us, as I mentioned, is we were created to expand work-based learning opportunities in career and technical education courses. We are an NQMS silver badging with Mentor National, which is really exciting. That basically just means that we meet about 85% of best practices known nationally and are a vetted program. We are school-based programming, and we serve about 200 to 250 high school students every school year. And right now we have about 12 staff serving 12 high schools. So that's us. Happy to be with you all today.
Thank you so much, Ericka. It's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Russel Dains. Russel Dains is the president and CEO of Save Our Youth, taking over for the founder of 25 years in January of 2019. He's worked for 21 years in the youth development field, with 13 of those years specifically focused on mentoring. Russel has experience with community, school-based, and peer mentoring programs. Welcome, Russel. We'd love to learn more about your mentoring program as well. Would you give us a quick overview?
Absolutely. Thanks, Audrey, excuse me. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, a little bit about Save Our Youth. We're in the Denver area as well. We started back in '93 to specifically combat violence and disconnection, specifically among Denver urban youth. There's something in Denver called the Summer of Violence back in '93, where just youth violence was running rampant. And founder Luis Villarreal got together with some leaders and said, hey, we need to do something about this. And Save Our Youth was born. We serve about 350 youth annually through community-based mentoring, roughly ages 10 to 17. As Ericka mentioned, we as well were part of the NQMS. We actually have the gold standard program, which means we're 100% in alignment with the elements of effective practice for mentoring with that. And that's a pretty unique process. Quick side note, if you haven't gone through NQMS and it's available to you, highly recommend it. Great way just to evaluate your program. Our match longevity, currently our mentors and mentees are averaging about 46 months. That's how long they're staying together. And so we're obviously doing something right on that level. And we currently have 13 staff. I throw that in there because we're going to be talking a lot about staff and employee engagement today and cultivating purpose amongst our team. So wanted y'all to have a kind of a interesting or a specific breakdown of how many staff we're actually working with, and excited to jump in on this.
Thank you, Russel. So let's just briefly introduce the topic and set the stage a little bit. So excellent employees and teams are cultivated with intentionality. There has been a lot of research conducted to learn more about what engages and motivates people, and we'll be focusing on 3 evidence-based approaches today. So the first is developing purpose. As humans, we need to feel connected to something greater than our individual selves. That as mentoring organizations, we need people who care deeply about our organizational missions and are helping to move our goals forward. We need to inspire them. We need to share power as well. When we share power with mentoring employees and provide them with autonomy to make decisions about how the work is done, employees are more engaged and more satisfied. This leads to better results and outcomes for our young people, as well as all of the stakeholders that are involved in our programs. And finally, supporting growth. Intrinsically, we have a drive toward improvement, growth, and mastery. We want to get better in the work that we do. By helping our employees to grow, we provide opportunities for them to get better at their jobs and better serve our stakeholders while also growing as individuals. When we work with our employees to develop mutual purpose, share power, and support growth, we create an environment for people to work together more effectively, find better solutions, create better outcomes, and feel more balanced. If you're interested in digging into the research in more detail, we encourage you to check out the book Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us by Dan Pink and the Search Institute's Developmental Relationships Framework. Now we're going to take a look at our first evidence-based approach, developing mutual purpose. Russell, would you start us off and explain how you've developed mutual purpose in a meaningful way for your employees at Save Our Youth?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the best things I found, really it's a non-negotiable, is pursuing this thing as an organization called extreme clarity. Being clear in everything, as clear as you can possibly be. Brene Brown says to be unclear is to be unkind. But I kind of started asking myself, what are kind of the most important things that we really want to kind of, above all else, make sure we're crystal clear on? The first one is our vision statement. This is basically just says why we exist as an organization. And then the mission as well. And that's how we see the vision come to life. And when you get crystal clear about the mission and vision, what it ends up doing, it provides riverbanks for your organization. It helps guide what you say yes to and what you say no to. Why is that important for your employees? Well, in my experience in the nonprofit field, there are a ton of passionate people working in nonprofits, and those passions can often go in a bunch of different directions. And when you kind of have those riverbanks, it helps you to hire people who are in alignment with that vision, but also help cultivate people towards that. And just basically keeps everyone on the same page. And at the beginning of this year, we, Save Our Youth, we revamped our vision and mission statement. And a couple tips, if you're going to be doing this in the near future, there was two big non-negotiables that I had as a leader when we said we want to do this. I've read hundreds of vision statements, hundreds of mission statements, and most of them are just either they're kind of dull or they're really hard to remember. And so I encourage anyone who's redoing this to keep in mind the two M's: make them memorable and make them motivational. The easiest way to make them memorable is to follow the 12 by 12 rule. Keep both those statements at 12 words or less that a 12-year-old can understand. So for example, at Save Our Youth, our vision statement is a world where every young person embraces their God-given worth. One sentence, really easy. Our mission statement, how we do that is we connect young people to hope through long-term mentoring relationships. That's what we're about. The motivational piece is also key as well. Find words that kind of make your team come to life and you come to life as a leader. It's real easy to fall into kind of businessy, or cliche type words. And that was kind of one of my non-negotiables in redoing this, that again, we keep the words motivational and keep it short. So yeah, clarity and mission and vision is huge, as well as you want to be very clear about roles for your team. In other words, every person on your team should be able to answer these questions. What is my job and what am I in charge of? At the end of the day, what do they know what they're supposed to be doing? It can be very necessary and even easy to slip into at times. But in the job description, almost every job description has that other duties as assigned. Try to keep that at a minimal when you're hiring. When you fall into other duties as assigned too much, it can have frustrating our team. That's there for your team. I've experienced that time and time again. And you also want to be very clear about your goals as an organization as well. How do you define and measure success? You have to do it, and it's challenging, especially in the mentoring field, because I hear all the time, and I even thought this at one point, how do you measure relationships? I mean, they're so fluid. I'm like, yes, you're not necessarily measuring outcomes, but you can assign metrics and success to things like, well, what are those things about the relationships we see, or what do we want to see as an organization? And then how does your team know whether they've succeeded at the end of the year or an end of a quarter? This can be one of the most frustrating things, especially going into reviews, that they think they're knocking it out of the park and their manager or supervisor is like, wow, no, you were not. And you're just not clear on that. I'm going to talk about goals more in a little bit, but the one thing we did at Save Our Youth this year was we created 4 organizational goals. Our leadership team got together and said, what do we want to accomplish for 2020? And we boiled it down to 4 things for this year. It is, we want 350 active matches or completions. Completion is when the match ends, but they've met the minimum time requirement, which for us is a year. We define that as a success. So we wanted to increase to 350 active matches. Develop a 3-year strategic plan that's going to guide us moving forward. Create and implement a staff culture code. And then our 4th goal was to make budget, which is probably a goal for every organization, or at least it should be. And anyways, the reason we did this is because we wanted to be able to channel that passion that all of our team, has. Again, sometimes when you get in the nonprofit field, you have so many passionate people and they operate kind of like a shotgun, which is hundreds of different pellets, lots of power behind it, but they explode into a number of different directions, but they don't go very far. What I tried to convert it to this year was harnessing all that passion into 4 very specific targets that a rifle can hit from a very, very far distance. And when you provide those organizational goals, that's one excellent way to channel that passion. But it's also not, you also have to be careful though, when you come up with these goals, if you just dictate them down to your team, that doesn't mean they're going to be complete. Essentially what you've given them is a quota at that point, not goals. And that's where I want to start talking about the how do you develop them, and how you develop these different goals and culture and things like that around your organization, and how you do that collaboratively. Again, you want to make sure your team has ownership. How do they really own these things? And the best way I can describe this is 2 examples of things we did this year. So when we developed our annual goals, like I said, for the organization, we took those to, our leadership team took those to our staff at our staff kickoff this year in January. And basically what we told them is, here are our 4 goals. We want you to break up into departments, program, admin, and development, and come up with 3 to 5 departmental goals that are directly going to meet one or more of these 4 organizational goals. So they did that. Then we broke it further down into positions. So for example, mentoring specialists, which are our case managers. Hey, mentoring specialists, what are 3 to 5 goals that everyone with your position title needs to meet so that it meets one of these departmental goals or one of the organizational goals? And then we took it one step further and said, now individually, what do you want to accomplish as a person that's going to help meet one of these things? This allows people to kind of experience other areas of the organization, prevent siloization, things like that. Anyways, we did that, and then they came up with all of them with discussion with their supervisors and things like that. So it wasn't just like, well, here are the 3 things I need you to accomplish this year. Also, in creating those, we were very intentional about saying, please include what you please include what you do in your day-to-day work. That's really important because if you give them a bunch of goals that's not in their day-to-day responsibilities, they're not going to meet them. They don't have the time to do it. So, for example, one of the position goals with our mentoring specialists is you have to reach out to 100% of mentors on your caseload on a monthly basis. That's a metric you can track. That's how we support our mentors, and we can easily track that. That helps them keep the first thing first, so they're not going off into other areas of the organization. Now that you've created them, the other key thing is, how do you review them on a normal basis? And this is where the review process comes in. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I personally have not enjoyed really any annual review process I've ever received or given. And here's the main reason why. It was a bunch of goals that was assigned at the beginning of the year. I didn't see them again until the end of the year. They weren't really talked about. And so I wanted to, how do we make this practical? So we moved into a quarterly review process that is simply 30 to 45 minutes, and it evaluates 2 things. update me on a high level where you're at with your goals. And secondly, alignment with where are you at with our core values. This is another piece kind of going back to fit. It's we have 6 core values, and this isn't performance related. This is more of provide specific examples of how much in alignment or not in alignment were you this past quarter. We found it's a lot easier to think through 3 months than it is back over the entire year as well. Again, this is a big of a culture shift for our team, but it is working very well now because it's keeping the main thing the main thing. The second thing that we did to develop or to have collaborative development was of our culture code. So when I came on board, we started talking a lot about culture, and basically we got the team together and said, first of all, what are our core values? Let's revisit those. Turns out those were the same. And then we came back to what is our culture? What is our culture? Core values are things that don't change about the organization. That's what you believe. They're there yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The culture code is how you're going to implement or live out those core values based on the season you're currently in. And that may change as the organization changes. Environmental factors, you may grow, you may shrink, whatever it may be. And so what we did is we got together, and I had the whole team involved with this. Again, I only have 13 people on my team, so I was able to get everyone. We did a lot of sticky note brainstorming. What do we want to see as what's most important with our culture code? And here's what we came up with. The first thing is we live out our core values. They're not just things that are written on the wall or in our employee manual. We live them out on a daily basis. We're driven by both our mission and metrics. Organizations tend to, in my experience, drift to one or the other. We're passionate about both our mission, which is what we do, connecting young people to hope through long-term mentoring relationships, and metrics, because that's what tells us whether we're achieving that mission. We communicate openly and honestly. This was all around how do we have honest communication with one another? How do we have difficult, crucial conversations with one another? And we're going to speak. By the way, to help flesh this one out, we read Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. If you have not read that as a team, highly recommend it, but be open to some very challenging but great thoughts. Number 4 is we make things happen. We just get stuff done. As a team, you own your role. You own what you're about, and you get things done. We achieve the results we say we're going to get. We just don't show up and punch a clock. And last one was a challenging one. We commit to the team. When we rolled this one out, our team was asking questions like, oh yeah, I mean, we say we want to be a family. What does that look like? And comfortable sharing, things like that. And we finally got to the point that, you know what, we're not a family. A family is about the person. A family you can't choose. Sometimes you don't even like people in your family. We're more like a team, and we're not a kids rec league team. We are a Super Bowl caliber team, and we get stuff done. And that doesn't mean we don't care about our people, but we're here for a purpose. And while you're on this team, we are going to invest in you. We are going to love you. We are going to give you the resources you need, both personally and professionally. But you are here to do a job on this team. And that can sometimes be challenging. And that was actually a breath of fresh air for our team once we kind of landed on that. So those are just a couple examples of how we work together as an entire team to develop these things as we're working together to pursue or to cultivate shared purpose. Be very clear about what's most important. Work together to develop those things.
Thank you, Russell. I really appreciate your collaborative development process that you took to get to these foundational factors. And I think one of the other words that just is really coming forward to me is alignment. All of this is aligned, and how important that is for organizational success. So thank you for sharing that. Ericka, how have you developed mutual purpose in your mentoring organization?
Yeah, so shout out to Russell. You are definitely giving us some gems of tools and tips that can really make us effective. So I'm learning too. So some other methods of developing mutual purpose. Our team is made up of people who really opted into this specific work. And so I think when people have that opt-in and that buy-in, it gets to that clarity that Russell was speaking about. And then when we are in the interview process or the reviewing the resume process and the whole hiring process, we're really intentional to ask specific questions, review resumes with certain lenses, and we have multiple people in different roles that review those things. So not only are managers looking at things, but team members and other stakeholders are really having buy-in and who's hired so that we can get to the people that we think are the right fit for this work. Because we believe that when we hire that way, we get people of purpose. And we know that in order for people to support the students with career mentoring, which is specific to what we do, people of purpose do that really, really well because they're dialed into their own journey and who they are, and they support students really well in that. It's really important to us that we know what people's core beliefs and passions are and seeing if they're aligned with ours and the work that we do. And we're really, really proud of that. And so, and one thing that we've been able to do more recently within Denver Public Schools in this COVID world, we've had to do some realigning of our staff. And just recently, in addition to, really vetting them when we hire our team, we now have people who have opted into doing career mentoring solely, whereas before they were kind of doing career mentoring, they were also supporting job shadows and other things. We've even honed in our purpose and what we do even more. And so the small but mighty team that I'm able to lead is that much more dialed in. And I feel like we're really going to be able to go into the school year with that lens, especially as we support schools as they're returning back to a world where it seems kind of uncertain in how students will learn. And I feel like we're really dialed in and tapped in, and we can support schools in that way. So that's just two ways that we have really done mutual developing of purpose within our organization.
Thank you so much, Ericka. People of purpose, I love it. Our second approach that we're going to talk about now is to share power with mentoring program employees. And this topic in particular can be really scary for leaders and managers. It can feel like a loss of control or, a challenging kind of approach. But we just recognize how immensely powerful this is in shaping programs that are truly impactful. So Ericka, I'm going to cue you up again, but could you tell us more about how you share power with your employees and provide opportunities for them to work autonomously?
Yes, I would love to. So I would say that my leadership style, and I lean into this a whole lot, is more of a facilitated leadership, meaning I provide spaces for things to work, but I really lean on and lean into my team. And I would also say that like facilitative leadership takes a lot of humility, and it takes a lot of the mindset of servant leadership, where as a leader, you're there to serve your team and make sure that they are at their most excellent. And that might mean that you defer the expertise to them, or you really lean into their strengths and operate in those ways. And so I typically like to say that I manage the program, the what we do. We do career mentoring within Denver Public Schools, but how that happens is really implemented by the team. It's implemented by their own expertise and their facilitative style and the strengths that they bring and how they approach the work. It can be really unique, and I'm open to that because they know their schools, they know their students, and they know what works. And so I find it tremendously valuable to lean into them. And to be quite honest, more times than not, those who are on our teams are the experts. They're the ones who are in the schools or are managing the mentoring relationships or boots on the ground, and they are the experts. And so letting them do what they do is the best way to get out of them what they are to do. And I just provide support. So I try to advocate, remove barriers, speak on their behalf. In the clutch, I'm able to support in any other way that they see fit. But I believe if I can focus on the what and they do the how, and if I really allow them to be the experts and I provide support, that working relationship, it's not only a really great dynamic between our working relationship, but it's the most effective way to produce results when we support support students. And so it's been a really humbling journey. And I will say that that facilitative leadership has not always been easy, but I have found that it's the best way to approach this work. And lastly, interdependence is key. And how we have kind of defined it, interdependence is really support meets collaboration. We are all competent people. We're smart, we're able, and we can do good work dependently. But when we begin to interdepend on one another and our strengths and our abilities and depend on what kind of Russell alluded to, being committed to the team, I think that's like the secret sauce to making a successful team work. They can depend on me to support them and engage them, and I can depend on them to execute great work in a way that makes the most sense for them and the students that they serve. So yeah, that's one of the major keys to facilitated leadership. And I also, being a facilitative leader and also a relational leader, I really see people as assets. That's exactly what they are. They are a tremendous resource, and investing in them in various ways is going to be your best bet. And one of those ways that we do that is we use personal assessments. So there's lots of personal assessments that are out there that gauge people's strengths and weaknesses or personality styles or approaches to work. I know specifically we use Emergenetics, but you really can find what type of personal assessment works for you and your team. But I just really want to make sure that we don't get locked into a specific personal assessment and being like, this is the only way that we can assess people, because Emergenetics is great, but there's a lot of other ways to do that. And remember, people are complex, and that these are just tools to assess who they are and whatnot. And people evolve and they grow, and they tend to flex into other areas as they grow. And so that personal assessment will also likely need to be revisited every so often. The tool itself isn't as important as the conversations that come out of the tool, where you can engage someone's why and how they are made up and how it shows up at work. So just want to make sure I put that out there, but that's really helpful in getting to know people as well as how they approach their work. I also invest in knowing people. And that comes sometimes out of personal assessments. It comes out of our hiring practices and time that we're spent together. And once I feel like I have a good idea what people are good at, whether it comes through conversation or more formal ways, I want to release them and let them go be good at it. I think as a leader, it sometimes is hard because we want to do a lot of things ourselves, or maybe we struggle with not getting the credit. But if people are really good at something, the best way to get the best out of them is to let them go and be good at it. And connected to that is allowing people to connect their interests and strengths with the work streams and initiatives that might be around. So a couple of examples of this is I have a team member who's really good at recruitment. They're really good at going into the community and making connections and making the asks and saying, hey, would you like to be a mentor with us? Would your company like to provide 5 or 6 mentors to support students in this specific school? And so I really said, great, go do that. We need that strength, and we have benefited tremendously from her work in that. And I have another team member who is super equity minded and really thinks about how decisions we make and work that we do affects students and families. And so that is her lens. So we often bring her to the table when we're making decisions or reviewing curriculum or needing support in that type of way. And that has been tremendously helpful. And we also have another young man who he came into the team, and his previous work was building team culture. So you know what? We allowed him to develop a new employee onboarding system that allowed him to start from the ground up on how we build our culture and our work. Those are just a few examples of once you know where people's interests and strengths are, if you give them an avenue for it, not only are they going to do good work, but then it connects themselves to their own personal strengths, and the quality of the work is good, but then the satisfaction of their job also is there. So it's a personal investment in them as well.
Thank you so much, Ericka. I love those examples that you've provided in really recognizing the strengths of your employees and allowing them to flex into those spaces and to continue to enhance the program overall. Russel, could you tell us more about how this shows up in your organization, how it is that you share power with your employees?
Absolutely. I don't have much to add from what Ericka said. It was pretty complete, but kind of an analogy. When I first came on board in 2019, my entire first month, the only thing I did was meet with staff, meet with the board, and kind of take the temperature of the organization. I did a whole lot of listening, very little talking. And one thing that kind of surfaced as a common frustration, I heard it over and over again, is, we talk about a lot of great ideas, and we got some great stuff, but nothing, a lot of those things seem to fall off the wayside. And I started asking, well, why is that? Well, I kind of looked at our org chart and said, wow, a lot of people, their roles aren't very clearly defined. A lot of people are doing a lot of things, and we were operating essentially like a basketball team does. Everyone plays offense, everyone plays defense, everyone touches the ball. Yes, there are specific positions in there, and there's specific plays and things like that. But yeah, we were operating like a basketball team. And I said, what would happen if we moved more to a football team mentality, where everyone has a very clear role? Not everyone touches the ball. Some people are hired just to do special teams, but there's no way the team wins the Super Bowl unless every single position and side of the ball, whatever, it works together. You have to work together, and you have to essentially do your job. And so we started asking these questions, and I actually started with my own role. When I came on board, I was like, well, what is my role? And I got the best piece of advice actually from one of my donors. I wasn't expecting to get it. He took over as a CEO for his for-profit organization from the founders. I was like, oh man, this is great. You just did this a couple of years ago. What advice would you give me stepping into this role? And he's like, Russell, you need to lead the organization and let your team run the organization. You need to lead the organization and let your team run the organization. That really stuck with me because I'm one of those people who loves jumping into some of the nitty-gritty details. I started off as a program guy, and I the boots on the ground stuff. And I pretty much had to ask myself, what are those things that only I can do as a leader? And it boiled down to 4 things: casting the vision, board development, staff culture, and organizational sustainability. Those are the 4 things I try to focus 80–90% of my time on. And it's tough because we're a smaller team, so I do have to jump in and do some running of the organization, some of the more operational and tactical things. But I'm trying to move towards that more and more. And then we did the same thing with our team. We started kind of moving them into buckets and saying, all right, who's going to own mentor recruitment? We got one person who's in charge of recruiting mentors. Who's responsible for our event side of things? Who is making sure that we are staying up with our NQMS and our data? And we signed all these very clear roles to people that at the end of the day, if we don't meet a goal in a certain area, or if we do, we know who to succeed or who to talk to. And so that role clarity is absolutely huge as much as possible. I understand that's not entirely feasible, but it kind of gives a goal to shoot for. Like at the end of the day, who do we know is responsible for different things?
Thank you so much, Russell. I just love that quote that you provided from your board member of you leading the organization and letting your team run the organization. And I think that really parallels what Ericka was talking about with her facilitative leadership style as well. So now we're going to talk about our very last approach, our last evidence-based approach today, and that is supporting growth. So Russell, could you talk to us more about how leaders and managers can support growth in their employees for the benefit of the organization and for their employees' own future career prospects as well?
Absolutely. I'd encourage you to embrace 3 things, and I'll talk about each one of these individually. Embrace failure, embrace coaching, and embrace diversity. Let's talk about failure first. You want to embrace the right type of failure when it comes to your employees. Failure should not be something that your employees are scared of. It should be something that they actually embrace, but it has to be the right type of failure. I mean, using another sports analogy, forgive me, but that is overly simplified. But if you're playing baseball, the right type of failure would be stepping up to the plate and swinging for the fences. The wrong type of failure is not stepping up to the plate at all. And there's different types. And so we need to learn to embrace failure. Thomas Edison, he said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And I love that quote because it's just like, okay, we learn through our failures, and are we able to really encourage our people to fail and take those risks as they go through things, as they're trying to figure things out, as they're owning their roles, if you will, have them embrace that failure. Next, you want to embrace coaching. And coaching is a big one as well. For some reason, I don't know why people view coaching as punitive. It's almost like a cuss word in them or to them. And I'm like, no, coaching is fantastic. I remember watching before one of the Patriots Super Bowl. My East Coast friends on the call will love this. They were doing a special on Tom Brady, and this is already after he won like 4 Super Bowls, and they did this little kind of vignette on him. And I mean, he's already in consideration for the greatest of all time, but his whole vignette was about how he still meets with his personal quarterback coach outside of what the Patriots provide, been meeting with him for years, and he still receives that coaching because he wants to grow. He wants to be the best that he can possibly be. And so when we're coaching people, we need to somehow change the culture to say that if I'm coaching you, it's because I care about you. It's because I believe you have what it takes. You can be excellent. You can be amazing at this, amazing at your role. And I want to be able to coach you well. If I don't coach you, if I don't offer you feedback, that's when you should be worried, because that means I don't think you're going to last here very long. That's the type of culture we're trying to create here at Save Our Youth, just to really embrace that. A couple things with coaching. When you're coaching, please highlight what people are doing well and use specifics. Just don't say like, hey, you're doing an awesome job. We all see right through that. There's, for example, one of our staff members who's really kind of going up the ranks here at Save Our Youth. She was really embracing this whole metric thing, and she led this discussion at our staff meeting. And I just shot her a quick email afterwards. Hey, this is real great that you did this. I really loved the form that you put out and how you guided that discussion. It was just a quick, and that's coaching right there. It's saying, hey, do more of this. I firmly believe we really need to highlight what people should be doing more of and not just focusing on what they should be doing less of. Another good opportunity for coaching is how you use your policy manual with your organization. My HR friends will not like this. HR is a necessity, but in my experience, policies beget policies, and we create one policy because somebody did one thing one time, and that really, when you over police things, provide too many policies, what you're unintentionally communicating sometimes is that you're not trusting your team. So we redid our policy manual this year as well, and we took out about 6 or 7 policies. We took out our snow day policy, we took out our telecommute policy, we took all these, and we replaced it with one 3-word phrase: use good judgment. Use good judgment. We put that in there specifically because that you can coach that. You can talk to people. You can talk to people about like, hey, well, why did you make that choice? And the managers can, and it becomes more conversational versus, hey, you violated this policy, let's talk about that. Then it becomes punitive. We're able to kind of talk to people through the judgment. And that's, again, where we bring in our culture code, we bring in our core values, like, hey, you did this. And it's kind of, it doesn't really align with committing to the team, or doesn't align with communicating openly and honestly. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So you're able to, coach them on use good judgment. The third thing I highly encourage everyone to embrace is diversity. And yes, diversity from ethnic backgrounds, of course, but also diversity from experience. Basically, we need people who have different viewpoints and strengths, because what this allows you to do is see the problem from a bunch of different angles. If you as a leader, if you have people on a team that are all alike, I mean, I don't need a bunch of mini Russells on my team. There's one of me, that's plenty. They know it and I know it. I want to be able to cultivate healthy conflict with my team, and the only way to do that is to have people to see things from a way that I simply can't. And so you want to be able to create an environment for this, that you have healthy tension. TD Jake said something in a leadership thing. He said once, he's like, I love having a healthy conflict where I want to be in a meeting with my leadership team, and we're just going at it and disagreeing adamantly. We look down at our watch and say, 12 o'clock, you want to get some lunch? I mean, if you get to the point where you can really just disagree adamantly, but you still respect one another. Couple things when doing that, it's real important, going back to alignment. Having people on your team when you're cultivating this diversity, diversity in a lot of areas, I believe you can't have too much diversity about why you exist as an organization. If you bring a bunch of people on that don't agree with your vision and mission, that's a recipe for disaster. You're going to be disagreeing on some core fundamental things. So when we hire people, I try to be very intentional about, okay, do you align with our mission, vision, and core values? And it has to be an absolute 100% yes. Diversity in that area is dangerous for an organization, if you're super clear on it, that is. What I do want people to be diverse on is the how. How do we get there? Let's come up with a bunch of different approaches. I need to hear from different people. I don't have all the answers, kind of like what Ericka was talking about earlier. And that's when the beauty of the team comes together, is when we can all align around what's most important. A couple things as well about this, again, supporting growth and mastery. As a leader, you really need to be intentional about modeling the behaviors you want to see as well. I've done this more times than I care to admit, but I ask something of my team and I don't model it myself. That's just not okay. That'll fail immediately. The second thing is this. When people come on board, aboard your team, understand that it's for a season. Turnover rates are exceptionally high, especially in the nonprofit field. And people are going to come in for a season. And we can be fearful of that, or we can kind of embrace that opportunity. And kind of the general approach I take is that anyone who comes onto the team at Save Our Youth, I don't care if you're here for a month or 10 years or 20 years, I want you to leave better than when you showed up. Leave better professionally, leave better personally. I've given you opportunities for growth, all sorts of things. And when you kind of come on with that mentality, you start treating people differently. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Russell. As many of you may know, I'm a huge proponent of healthy conflict, and it's so important to be able to move our mission forward, to be able to really identify what the best approaches are. And it sounds like you've done an excellent job of creating the psychological safety necessary to have those healthy conflicts at your organization. So thank you, Russell, for sharing all of those wonderful tips. Ericka, from your perspective, what are some ways that leaders and managers can support growth in their employees?
Yeah, so similarly, I have 3 areas that I'll unpack a little bit. So intentional and consistent check-ins with my staff, as well as demonstrating transparency and feedback in a loop fashion, and then really matching people and projects based on needs and interests. So in the next slide, you'll notice that I'm going to dive a little bit deeper around check-ins. We call them one-on-ones, and it is really the crux of our working relationship, because the staff that I oversee are mostly in schools and out running the program, and so I don't necessarily sit next to them every day. And so building that relationship as well as having consistent time together is critical. And so thank you, Russell, for really going into depth on what coaching can look like and it being a positive thing. And so this is where some of those coaching elements can be, is in these one-on-ones. It's a space where immediate and specific feedback can be given mutually. It's where we review goals and the progress of those. I say consistent and frequent because if it's on the calendar and it's typically the same day of week at the same day of time, it's more likely to happen than if it's more random or if it's not intentionally scheduled out. So that's something that we live by, our calendar, which I'm sure is true for most people. And I try to keep them as much as possible, even if I feel like there's not a whole list of things we go through. It's just a checkpoint just to touch base and make sure that we're still rocking and rolling and doing really good. And some of the ways that I've scheduled these is I have a team of people based on the assessments that we've done and how I've gotten to know them. Some of them need a little bit more time and others are really able to get it done in a shorter time. So for my external processors, my team members that need more time to talk things out and really connect in that way, our one-on-ones are a little bit longer. But those who may not need the extra processing time, those meetings are a little bit shorter. I really do try to adapt to their learning and working style. One thing that we do have in our one-on-ones is a note catcher. And it basically, it's a note catcher for all of our one-on-ones. So it's a living document that we're constantly inside of. So even in between our meetings, we're plugging things in, we're putting things that we want to make sure that we want to touch base on. It's just a really great way to connect in a concise way versus sending 20 emails over the week. We really try to make sure that we keep things that can be done in that one-on-one time set aside during them. I do them with my team, my director does it with me, and it's a really effective way to connect in that way. And so another really important reason why this is helpful, and it connects to some of the things that Russell shared, is we not only just do goal check-ins, but there's a whole list of notes and things that we've talked about over the year. And so when we do mid-year and end-of-year evaluations, there's substance and there's actual things that we're tracking. And then there's no surprises because we have had consistent check-ins, we've had honest conversations, there are moments of coaching. And so it makes those mid-year and end-of-year evaluations less formal because we kind of already know where we are and go from there. So I highly recommend that if you don't have intentional, frequent, and consistent check-ins, that you put that into practice. It's been a game changer for our team. Also, we value transparency and feedback. So in this next slide, I want to kind of just share a specific example of how this has looked. So within Denver Public Schools, we have something called Collaborate, and it's essentially collaborate, where leaders in the district provide a survey to their team, and their team basically shares their feedback on given questions as well as open-ended feedback. And there were some things that my team shared in that survey that were going to be really important for me to acknowledge as a leader, and as well as come back to them and say, this is what you all have said. And so from there, we scheduled a time together where we could really go through that feedback, and we as a team define what the feedback has said and what are the next steps that we're going to take. And this is a space where you have to be really brave. And it was very valuable, but there was parts of me that were just crushed because I thought I was killing it. And the feedback proved it different. And so it was a brave space, and I took their feedback and we came up with a game plan. And then what I did is I went to my manager and my executive coach and I said, here's what my team said. This is what I'm hoping to do. Here's what I think a great plan is. Got their feedback and then circled back to my team and said, here's the final plan. What do you think? And from there, I was able to demonstrate that I appreciate their transparent feedback and that I'm going to come back around and say, this is what I'm going to do about what you provided. And so when doing that, I think it also welcomes the opportunity to do the same thing for those that you supervise. So I believe that there's more trust that is built, there's more transparency that is built, and I think our work is going to be better for it. And that's just an example of transparency and feedback and how to loop that back around. And then lastly, aligning. Audrey alluded to it, Russell alluded to it, so it's the big word of the day, alignment. And the turnover piece is very real as well. There are people who are in these positions usually between 1 and 2 years. And how alignment has worked really well is when I know my people based on the assessments they've taken, the time I've spent together, and those one-on-ones. I know where they're really strong. And I also know where, if there is another opportunity within our organization, or if there's a need for a certain skill, or if one of their interests will meet something that is shared, I share that with them. So quite frankly, there are a few of my team members who have left the team to do other work, either within our larger team or the district or beyond. But I was happy to share opportunities because I want them to grow and to fly. And it's actually been such a huge benefit. I believe that people, when you give them permission to really grow and be who they are at their best, you get the best out of them while you have them. And then they also, like Russell said, they leave better than when they came. And so that's a brave thing to do too, because you don't want to lose great people, but if you know that there's an area in the department that they would be even better at, you bring it up. And I would hope that my manager would do the same for me. So alignment, not only within your individual program, but maybe even in your larger organization is a win if you can make that happen. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I think really help build growth and mastery within a team.
Thank you so much, Ericka. Those are awesome, just absolutely awesome approaches. So our participants have been provided with a lot of excellent information from our panelists. Thank you again, Ericka and Russell, for how much you've given us today and all of the amazing insight you've provided. So now we're going to go through a very quick activity that you can use to assess the options before you. So this is called option rationalization. And it's an excellent way to determine what tactics you should pursue. What's going to provide the most value to your organization, and what are you going to be able to actually do? So what you have here is a 2x2 with the x-axis as the value to the mentoring organization, and the y-axis is your ability to execute. So how you use this is you go through and you assess what you can do as an organization based on the resources that you have, the skills, the capabilities, as well as what's going to provide you the most value. So ultimately what you're looking for are the things that are going to be both high value and easy to execute. So I've provided a list here on the left-hand side of all of the different activities and approaches and tactics that we've talked about today. So we have developing purpose. We've talked about foundational clarity. So things like mission and vision, collaboratively developing these foundations, culture code, and focus and identity. In sharing power, we've talked about facilitative leadership, viewing people as assets, and creating role clarity. And finally, in supporting growth, we've talked about encouraging the right failure, coaching, diversity, check-ins, transparency and feedback loop, and matching needs and interests. So what we would love to invite you to do is to use this option rationalization activity to assess some of these approaches we've talked about today and to determine what it is that you can do in your own organization. So again, what we're looking for are the things that have the highest value and are going to be the easiest for you to execute. And those are the do nows. The other quadrants to look at are if something has low value to your organization, but you're excellent at it, why would you do it? You're going to be using energy and resources in ways that aren't going to help to move your program forward. We also have those things that are highly valuable to your organization, but you might not have the resources yet to do them. And those are things that you should invest in. Those are things that ultimately will help to drive better outcomes, greater performance, better engagement with your employees, and they're worth starting to invest in. And then the last quadrant, these are the things to stop doing immediately. If they don't provide any value to your organization and you can't execute them, don't do them. All right. So thank you all for being with us today. We're going to get to the Q&A now. We've had tons of great questions coming in. So Ericka and Russell, I hope you're ready for some of these great questions. I'd love to spend the rest of our time talking with both of you.
We're ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. So this first one is for Russell. Russell, you talked about the importance of creating goals. How do you create goals that are less about numbers and more about quality of service? Numbers are definitely essential for funding and outcomes reports, but staff can get frustrated that they have unrealistic numbers to hit and that it takes away from the quality of the service that they provide.
That's the question I received a half a dozen times when we started doing this process. And yeah, it's very clear. And I believe everything can be measurable. For example, if I want a healthy relationship with my children, as an example, there's things that I can do. It's both, you're measuring both quantity, how much time I'm spending with them, and quality. What are those things that I am doing with them? And you can kind of get to the point where you need both of those goals. It's not only how much, it's also, how are you measuring that quality? I encourage my team not always think about the outcome. So when we came up with goals, we don't have data around necessarily graduation rates or drug use and things like that. I mean, there's just so many factors beyond our control. What we have learned over 26 years of doing this there are very specific things that we need to do on a regular basis that is going to impact the length of the relay or the quality of the match. So like I talked about earlier, are the mentoring specialists reaching out to the mentors at least once a month, every mentor on their caseload? Notice how we didn't say you connected with them, because that's beyond your control. You can't control whether a mentor returns your call or not. But we know that when mentors feel supported, that they are more bought in and they're more likely to keep the match going. We did something similar with recruitment. We started asking numbers like, well, we get a lot of inquiries for being a mentor, but we have about a 10% conversion rate. Well, the problem we're trying to solve is we need more mentors. How can we increase that from 10% to 12%? And of course, quality mentors. We know the type of mentors we're looking for. That's not going to change. But so what are some of those different goals that we can do? So that is one of those goals. How do we increase it from 10% to 12%? They've helped come up with the goal, the team did, and they're coming up with the ways to do it. I'm not dictating how to do that. That's kind of that goal versus quota. Someone who's like, yeah, I'll do this because it's part of my job, versus, yeah, I think I can make this happen. That comes up to the collaborative development piece. Here's the biggest thing, the biggest challenge I've found overcoming this. We live in a world of false dichotomies that, well, if I'm only focusing numbers, that means I can't focus on quality. And I just don't think that's true. I think we have to replace the word but with the word and. How do we do this and do this? So again, how do we get to 350 active matches and completions and keep the same match length of 46 months? It's both and. It's not either or. If one of them, if we increase our match length to 60 months, but we're down to 10 matches, that's not good. At the same time, if we jump up to 1,000 matches, but we've dropped down to, well, they're only meeting 9, 8, 6 months now, that's not good either. And so kind of finding that balance between all these different goals. Basically, the way we did is we said, what's most important as an organization? We didn't even start putting any numbers to it. And then we fleshed out this whole idea of SMART goals. I think most people have heard of this: specific, measurable, actionable, relative, and timely. So Google SMART goals if you haven't seen that. But you start with what's most important. How do you put a goal to it?
Thank you so much, Russell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ericka, I have a question for you as well. How often do you recommend having check-ins with staff, and why this frequency?
Great question. I think you just have to keep in mind your own personal schedule and what you have margin for. For us, I do weeklies, and they range between 30 minutes to an hour. Remember, based on people's preferences and the time that they need. And the reason why it's that frequent is because that might be the only time outside of like a larger staff meeting that I might get one-on-one time with them. And I found that rhythm and that cadence works really well. And since I know that most of our mentoring programmatic efforts are not as high on Mondays, I sometimes make them on those days. But that's just really important for me to make sure that we have the time that is needed. If that doesn't work for your calendar, I wouldn't let more than 2 weeks go by than having that consistent one-on-one. I also have the weekly ones with my director, and so those touch points have just been really valuable. And it's always a good idea to maybe check in, maybe 3 months in, say, hey, is this cadence working? Do we want to extend our time? Do we want to shorten our time? Doing those check-ins just to see is also helpful. Nothing has to be written in stone.
Thank you, Ericka. Russel, I have another question for you.
Shoot.
You had mentioned that you, as a leader, have some roles that only you can do. And we've had a number of people ask if you could repeat those. So we've got casting a vision is one of those only roles. Mm-hmm. So if you could talk a little bit more about what those are again, and why these are specific to leadership and the roles that you should be focusing on.
Absolutely. Yeah, casting the vision. I mean, it's up to the leader to determine the vision and direction of the organization. That's kind of inherent in being a leader. We get that. I would also say, if I could change that, casting and communicating the vision. One thing I learned in my first year is I casted it, but I didn't do it enough. And keeping the vision in front of my team over and over again, almost to the point where they're rolling their eyes at you, be like, yeah, we know. That means they get it. The second one is board development. That's the only thing I can do. I mean, early on, just in this role, the board has been essential with the transition and me coming as a leader, but also staying involved in the organization. And board development, I mean, board members are volunteers, mostly in the nonprofit field, and they can burn out, and they can sometimes feel like they're being used for their time, talent, and or treasure. And I think when you can develop them, and that I need to be very intentional about that. So taking my board members out to meals, checking in on them, hey, how are you doing? Not only calling them just when you need something, is really the only thing that the leader can do. The third one is organizational sustainability. This is in part development, but what are those other opportunities that can go line in line with vision? So for example, we're looking into some potential things of, well, is consulting, could that be a revenue stream? Are there grants we haven't applied for? I mean, there's all sorts of things that I can do. I still do have a development team that does most of the work, but on a strategic level, how do I make sure that this organization is around 5, 10, 20 years from now to keep doing the great work that we're doing with young people? And the last one is staff culture. Culture, this is kind of the tricky one. Every organization has a culture. I just prefer to have a say in what the culture is like here. And this really, there's a book that shaped my my thoughts on this. Is called Boundaries for Leaders. Boundaries for Leaders by, I think it's Henry Cloud. Anyways, talking about staff culture is going to happen. And the leader should be in charge. That doesn't mean I dictate the culture. I can't. But that's why I facilitated this whole process to say, hey, let's be intentional about the culture we have here, and the culture that we want, and the culture we're going to run after within our organization. Because if not, that's when you get some aspects of the toxic culture that are guaranteed to creep up on you. And so I was very adamant about putting staff culture as far as one of my top 4 things. And then, so again, I try to, those are all the 4 things that only I can do, or only I should be doing, in my opinion. There's a lot of other things I could be doing. I will be honest, those are the 4 things that most intentionally I want to avoid, because they're hard. I'd much rather jump into mentor recruitment discussions and event programming and things like that, because that's my comfort level. But as a leader, I have to kind of learn to transcend it, to really focus my time on those things, because that's what's best for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Russell. I have one last question for both of you to close us out. And this is, I think, a really, really important question. There are so many competing priorities that managers and leaders have within organizations. And also, you know, we have board members and funders who also may have their own priorities. and that can influence the way we do our work. So how do you support staff when you have all of these other competing priorities going on and too much work to do in the time period that you're given each week? How do you continue to support staff despite those circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would probably say it has to be a non-negotiable. If you're not developing your staff, then all the other things that are prioritized on your plate will be compromised as well. And I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you're willing to schedule it and just make it something that happens on a consistent basis, then you're not trying to figure out how to approach it and how to do it. If you just put something in place like a one-on-one or something like that, then it happens. And I think that one-on-one time is really important because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the appreciation languages. It's similar to the love languages. And a lot of people's appreciation language at work is quality time and words of appreciation. And I have found that in those one-on-ones, scheduled and consistent, that I'm able to get that time in with them, and it allows me to not only just be to support them, but it also gives me back what I might need from them. And when you have those, then it's accounted for. You put intentional effort towards it, and you reap the benefits of it. That's just what has worked for me. And outside of that, I think I would be drowning because there are so many other things that are important, and if I wasn't intentional about it, it wouldn't happen.
Thank you, Ericka. Russel, do you have anything to add to that?
The biggest thing I've found is helping my team prioritize. There's a lot going on, and when they see all this stuff, they can almost just shut down. And so that's where having the clarity on the goals really helps. Say, hey, okay, let's just get together. And I get very practical. Bring me your to-do list. Let's talk through these 20 items on there. Which one of these are going to have the biggest impact on this, or which one of these are most time sensitive, and really just drag and dropping it into a calendar. Like, how much time do you think you'll need this for an hour? And kind of this whole planning process, and just kind of essentially talk them off the ledge, if you will. We almost always have more time than we think. And it's when we look at everything and start getting overwhelmed, when we can start helping them put these priorities into a calendar and say, yeah, I'll maybe need an hour for that. And all of a sudden, their 20-item priority list is put into a manageable schedule. And it kind of calms them down a little bit. The other thing I really encourage doing is use your time off, use your PTO. People need to go, they need to take time for themselves. I mean, life shouldn't be about work. And I try to get my team to really be engaged with that. One of the benefits I actually offered this year, in addition to 10 paid holidays, I gave them, everyone gets their birthday off. Guess what? That's just a benefit you get. That's a holiday for you. Take your birthday or the day after, whichever you prefer. Go ahead and take it off. And just really, we want them taking care of themselves on an emotional, mental, spiritual, physical level. And any way I can help facilitate that, it just kind of provides the environment for them to bring their best selves to work, even when things are busy and seemingly out of control.
Thank you so much, Russel and Ericka, for being with us this morning, for providing our participants with excellent information and tools to inspire, engage, and cultivate excellent employees and mentoring programs. Our panelists are excited to make themselves available for you beyond today's webinar. So participants, if you have additional questions, if we didn't get to your questions, or if you'd like to learn more about our panelists' work, please feel free to contact them or me directly. Mentor scales impact by developing and supporting a national network of affiliates. These affiliates provide the leadership and infrastructure necessary to support the expansion of quality mentoring relationships in local communities or statewide. Mentor affiliates also serve a unique role as a clearinghouse for training, resources, public awareness, and advocacy. We encourage you to find out whether you have an affiliate in your region and connect with them to learn about local resources and training opportunities. Additionally, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, a national database of mentoring programs. This zip code searchable database allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program. Finally, check out the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center website for no-cost mentoring resources to help you apply evidence-based mentoring practices to your program. The OJJDP NMRC provides evidence reviews on mentoring models and mentoring for special populations, implementation resources from training manuals to mentor guides reviewed by the NMRC Research Board, and the opportunity to request no-cost training or technical assistance. As a reminder, 1 week after the webinar, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage, where we will post the recording, slides, and additional resources. Also, don't forget, we want your feedback. At the end of today's webinar, please answer the short survey and help us to make this series even better. Be sure to visit the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series page on the Mentor website for an archive of all past webinars and information about upcoming webinars. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Please join us next month in August for capacity building strategies for smaller mentoring programs. Thank you so much and have an excellent day.